Hello, friends and comrades. Welcome. Today, we're going to be discussing some of the most important news in global politics. We'll talk, of course, about South Africa's case against Israel at The Hague. We'll talk about the US and the UK's bombing of Yemen, one of the poorest countries on the planet. We'll talk about the resurgence of ISIS and the backing that ISIS has of the US, its roots in US Camp Buka and some other things. We'll also talk about Jelly Roll, who testified not on fentanyl, but on the fentanyl crisis affecting our communities in the U.S. We'll talk about all that and much more right after this.
Also realize that the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
All
All
right.
right, Eddie, it's been a minute. How you doing, brother?
I'm good. I'm good. Lately I've been really focusing on reading a lot of self-help books, focusing on meditation, unlo- unlocking my inner Zelensky. So yeah, I've been reading a lot Nancy Pelosi's book. I've been reading that lately. I've been reading this one, a lot of Ibram X. Kendi. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about what I've been learning.
And that's the most important thing communists ought to learn how to do, how to unlock their inner Zelensky. That right
Right.
there's the
Who doesn't want to be a fascistic kleptocrat,
right.
acting as a pawn of the United States, and waging a war against a nuclear power in Russia with vastly superior military forces, um, doing cocaine, surrounded by a government of neo Nazis who don't respect you or listen to you. I mean, what else? What else could you even want to be?
Yes, right. You took the coked out part out of my mouth, but yeah, definitely an idol, someone to aspire to be like. And if we were all Zelenskys in a sort of Kantian formulation, act as if the maxim of your action were to become a universal law, the world would be just terrific. If we were all a bunch of Zelenskys, if we were capable of channeling our inner Zelensky, as this great, uh, you know, epoch-making author Jesse Asia Kenzer has written in this wonderful text.
Absolutely. And Matt Randazzo asks, is that book serious? Unfortunately, it is. It is serious, and it has 4.3 stars on Amazon. Whenever you see something like that when it comes to the Zionists or the Ukrainians, it's usually something that's boosted by their bots. But still, um, yeah, a real book, a real self-help book for the most delusional liberals.
Yeah, no, extremely tragic, but not more tragic than all of the things that have been going on. I think we can start. You want to start with the with what's been going on in the Red Sea, or with the
Yeah,
ice? Okay,
yeah,
so
let's begin.
let's pull up a video here to react to. Um, by the way, Eddie, this was your video. Do you want me to start it on the basis of where you linked it, or from
Oh
the start?
no, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Start from the beginning.
Okay. You want me to play it, or are you gonna pull it up?
I can do it. Oh wait,
Okay.
never mind. Or give me a sec. Okay.
Garland had Montero again today. He had him the other day, and it was just terrific.
What's that? Sorry, I missed what you said.
No, one of the audience members is mentioning that Garland Nixon had
Mm.
Montero on
Oh,
today.
nice. That's so good to hear because he's so underappreciated and under talked to in new media. So and he's just been doing his thing in his community, in terms of organizing. So it's good that his voice is getting boosted through channels like that. But
Yeah.
speaking of channels that I've been enjoying lately, Glenn Greenwald's System Update is a really fantastic show. He's not a socialist or communist, but he's a real principled journalist. He's definitely left-leaning and progressive, and a staunch free speech advocate. Was one of the people who was critical of big pharma during COVID, critical of lockdowns and things like that. So really principled journalist who's been at it for a long time. He's super sharp. And here he's going to take down Ben Shapiro's defense of the bombing in Yemen. Of course, Ben Shapiro has just been absurd on the issue of Israel-Palestine. Israel could do anything. And Ben Shapiro would defend it, and he would find a way to blame Hamas for it. So,
And he has articles from a decade or two ago, basically legitimizing the genocide of the Palestinians explicitly.
yeah,
That's something that low key
civilian
shared.
casualties are okay with me was
Yeah.
the title of one article.
Yeah.
Craziness.
If you look at those, let's say, 4 key prongs of Biden's foreign policy, Ukraine, Israel, Yemen, and China, the establishment wing of the Republican Party, the dominant wing of the Republican Party represented in the presidential race by Nikki Haley and in the Congress and the Senate by people like Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio and Tom Cotton, are fully on board with all of those policies. The policy toward China has been to militarily encircle it, to put bases in places like South Korea and Japan and the Philippines and off various islands to essentially militarily encircle the Chinese. Biden was the first president in decades to explicitly state the U.S. would go to war with China in order to defend Taiwan. And almost all of these foreign policy prongs, the core one.
Which is such an insane thing to say, by the way. We're going to go to war with China in order to defend Taiwan, which is part of China. Okay.
That define the Biden approach to the world have received applause from the vast majority of the Republican Party, which supported the war in Ukraine, which obviously supports the U.S. Paying for and arming of Israel, which supports the bombing of Yemen, and which supports an antagonistic and aggressive posture toward China. Here is Ben Shapiro, yesterday, just as one example, who spent 15 minutes or so on his program justifying and cheerleading the decision of the Biden administration to bomb Yemen, not just the act of bombing Yemen, but the rationale for it. Now, obviously, Ben Shapiro is somewhat of a special case because he is somebody who has long wanted the American armed forces to be used to fight against Israel's enemies. It's something that is a very consistent part of his worldview, but it's not like he's aberrational in that regard. There are a lot of people who believe that the United States should devote everything it can, its resources, its bombs, its military, to seeing the world through the eyes of Israel, to see Israel's enemies as the United States' enemies. And so obviously with the Houthis saying we're against the destruction of God.
And what's interesting is one of the critiques that I heard Tucker Carlson making of Ben is like, you claim to be a conservative. You claim to be an American conservative or an American patriot, but clearly his Zionism comes before his loyalty to America, which is supposed to be, number one for the conservatives is their loyalty to the U.S., sort of nationalism. But he instead is saying that the U.S. should put themselves at the service of Israel, and they should act, as a military arm of Israel. And it's just absurd, and it's caused him to be criticized by Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, and even Candace Owens. So even conservatives have looked at his ultra-Zionist talking points and arguments since October 7th, and they've kind of been disgusted by it.
Gaza, we're taking retaliation against Israeli ships and American ships. Ben Shapiro is thrilled that there are now combat troops of the United States Armed Forces now actively fighting in the Middle East against one of Israel's enemies. Not just the Houthis, but in Ben Shapiro's eyes, an arm of Iran, the ultimate enemy of Israel that neocons and warmongers have long wanted the United States to fight. Remember, at the start of the war in Israel, people like Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley were saying, let's bomb Iran Lindsey Graham recently said, let's bomb Iran off the map. And so this obsession with going to war with Iran has long been a centerpiece of traditional Republican, Bush Cheney, kind of Mitt Romney foreign policy that would fit perfectly comfortably into the GOP establishment prior to Trump, which they're eager to bring back. So here's Ben Shapiro. I think it's worth going through a few excerpts of what he said, again, in defense of the Biden administration's decision to launch a new war against one of Israel's enemies.
So last night, CENTCOM, as well as a bunch of other foreign countries, part of an American alliance, struck at targets in Yemen. They struck the Houthis. The Houthis are a ragtag group of terrorists who have taken over a large swath of Yemen after a massive civil war between the Houthis and the Saudis over control of the country. The Iranians have been funding the Houthis for years and years and years. And we'll get into the history of what exactly...
Can you pause that real quick, Eddie? You know, it's interesting how the label of terrorist gets thrown around because up until maybe a few days or weeks ago, the Ansar Allah, the Houthis, weren't considered terrorists. They were re-added to the terrorist list conveniently enough when they participate in these great actions in order to try to do what they can to prevent the Israeli genocide of the Palestinian people. So it's another one of those uses of the word terrorist to just attack whoever ends up being an enemy of U.S. imperialism. It has nothing really concretely to do with terror. One of the stories that we'll talk about today is how the leading terrorist force, ISIS, is being propped up by the U.S. in order to fight against the axis of resistance that's creating itself and in the Middle East and being led in many ways by Yemen.
For sure. And the Oxford Dictionary definition of terrorism is just the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in pursuit of political aims. And what does that sound like more besides Zionism and what Israel's been doing in the past few days? But of course, they invert reality and call the people who are fighting against Israel the terrorists.
To say the reason that all of this is happening right now is because the Houthis decided that they were going to try to act as an Iranian proxy arm and generate support for Iran by attacking Israel and then by more largely attacking shipping in the Red Sea. Now, shooting off a few rockets or missiles at Israel to get down by American ships or by the Saudis, that really didn't have much of an impact on world opinion or on the world at large. But attacking ships in the Red Sea absolutely does.
Okay, he's exactly right. He's seeing the world through the Israeli perspective. He's saying the motive of the Yemenis is to strike back at Israel as punishment for what they're doing in Gaza. So the question yet again becomes, how is that an American war? The Yemenis haven't killed anybody. They haven't sunk any American ships. They have been trying to impede the flow of commercial travel through the Red Sea by some countries that they perceive as being responsible for.
And the thing, too, is the Red Sea borders Yemen, right? So they're stopping commerce in order to stop a genocide on their own border. The U.S. has sanctions on Iran, sanctions on Venezuela, crippling embargoes on the DPRK and Cuba. We go all around the world and stop commerce, stop all imports with the explicit aim of destabilizing those governments and those countries and making life harder for their people. We go all around the world and do that and stop global commerce, and we're just allowed to. And other countries have to go along with it because Western finance capital dominates the global financial system. But then when the Houthis block Israeli trade when Israel's doing a genocide on their own borders, we freak out about it and try and start a war with them and start bombing them. It's the hypocrisy is unreal.
Yeah, especially when you look at the international law that the U.S. and basically every country in the world has signed on to. The country that's perhaps acting the most in line with what you ought to be doing when there's a situation such as there is in Gaza are the Yemenis. And it's that simple. So they're bombing a country for doing the thing that international law requires of them to do, which is do everything in your power to stop a genocide under the total hypocritical pretext of a blockade that affects only the ships that are destined to help Israel. While, as you said, the U.S. is the country that sanctions and blockades more nations on the planet than anyone else, and that literally steals ships. We saw a few years ago an Iranian ship filled with oil, tanker ship that was heading to Venezuela, just get stolen in an act of piracy by the U.S. And recently, a similar ship was stolen and then recaptured by the Iranians. That shows you how the tides have kind of changed and the axis of resistance has strengthened itself. And the U.S. can't really do what it did some years ago to it anymore.
For the Israeli war in Gaza. But why does this mean that the United States now has to go to war because the Houthis are angry about what the Israelis are doing? This is something we talked about from the start, that the cost that the United States was incurring in order to defend this foreign country yet again is not just measured in the billions of dollars that we're going to spend to transfer to the Israelis, nor in the already depleted stockpiles we're going to use to transfer the weapons to them that they're using, as everyone knows, to destroy Yemen. Whenever there's a video of babies that are killed or children being operated on without anesthesia, broadcast to the entire world, everybody knows that it was American weapons that did that, and that bears a real cost. But the biggest cost is the danger that we're going to now have the Ben Shapirs of the world demanding, and now getting, and now celebrating the deployment of American troops in an actual fighting war, in a shooting war against other Israeli enemies in the Middle East. That's what we have, and that explanation of his makes clear that that is actually the dynamic that he is happy about. Let's watch a couple other excerpts.
The prior year. Well, all of this drove last night an allied attack on certain resources in Yemen controlled by the Houthis. It was a telegraphed punch, meaning this entire exercise was designed to deter the Houthis, not designed to actually kill or destabilize the Houthis, who in fact, as we say, are a terrorist group that governs a large swath, part of Yemen. The reason to telegraph the attack is to allow Iranians to get their military forces out of the way so as not to provoke some sort of escalation with Iran more directly, because of course Iran has lots of forces on the ground helping out the Houthis in Yemen.
Now, obviously, needless to say, anybody who dislikes Israel or who fights against Israel is a terrorist. That's pretty much the
It is an escalation against Iran. It is. He's acting like this isn't, what he's trying to do is act like this isn't an action that could inflame a regional war in the Middle East. But it absolutely is. That's what's so dangerous and so reckless about this, especially the fact that Biden bypassed Congress to go ahead with this bombing, is it inflames tensions. And shortly after this happened, we saw Iran firing missiles at U.S. military positions in Iraq. So clearly Iran did take it as a threat, as of course they did. It's the U.S. getting more militarily involved in their region to fight against one of their allies for trying to stop a genocide. So, yeah, Shapiro's analysis is poop.
And, just some days ago, maybe a week or so ago, Iran was bombed on the anniversary, the 5th anniversary of the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the great general, the ISIS slayer, unifier of the people of the region. ISIS claimed responsibility for it, but as we'll see in one of the later segments of today's show, it's, curious that all of ISIS's targets are the countries in the axis of resistance that are building up pressure to the U.S. and Israel.
Yeah, and there are many people who believe that ISIS has always been, an asset of Mossad and the U.S., at least indirectly, if not directly. You want to go with keep going for a while with this video, Carlos, or you want to move on?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen it, so I don't know if good stuff keeps if the good stuff keeps coming. But yeah,
let's do one more clip, I guess.
Definition at this point: any group that defies the orders of the United States or Israel is a terrorist organization. And even though the Houthis are now running and governing Yemen, Ben Shapiro wants to call them a terrorist organization. But as he just said, it was a campaign that we had telegraphed for many weeks. It was something that was very well planned. Everybody knew it was coming. And that begs the question that we raised in the first segment of why the Biden administration could not simply have gone to Congress to debate whether or not it was time to go start a new war, risk a new war, in order to fight against one of Israel's enemies in the Middle East. It should have been openly debated and then voted on in Congress for exactly the reason Ben Shapiro just said. There was no emergency there. It didn't pop out of nowhere. The opposite was true. It was very deliberate. And we had weeks to plan it and threaten it, which means we had ample time to have gone to Congress to debate it and to seek its authorization.
Abe Lowe. The Houthis, of course, say they're not going to be deterred.
It reminds me of when Obama justified putting sanctions on Venezuela by saying they're a threat to our national security, which is just like laughable. Like the Venezuelan military is about to invade the United States as we're dumping millions and millions of dollars into the violent far-right Venezuelan opposition and starving them with sanctions. They're threatening our national security. It's the same with the Houthis. All the Republicans and Zionists are saying, well, if Israel doesn't fight the Houthis and Hamas, they'll come to the U.S. No, they won't.
Yeah, but this is either way an extremely scary situation because there's so much potential for escalating. The Houthi leaders have made it very explicit that they do not fear a direct confrontation with the U.S. They're ready to fight. I mean, they took on a Saudi genocidal war against them for 7-8 years, and they came out with their heads up high, ready to fight like hell for their Palestinian brothers and sisters more than honestly anyone in the Arab world. So it's a very scary situation because we know that the Houthis are going to have to retaliate just on the basis of principle, and the U.S. can't just sit after a retaliation. It can't just sit back with its hands in its pocket. It's going to have to hit back again. So it's a real complex and potentially very catastrophic situation that we have in our hands here, simply because of the fact that the U.S. wants to protect the interests of a country that literally the whole world is seeing commit genocide right before their very eyes, and trying them in the International Court of Justice for doing so.
This works in the Middle East is that you have basically terrorist groups that provoke a response from an overwhelming power. They get their asses absolutely kicked, and then they claim that just because they survived, they won. That's what's currently going on in the Gaza Strip. Hamas provokes a gigantic Israeli military response, the largest Israeli military response to any attack since 1973. And they get their asses absolutely handed to them, and most of their fighters killed, and most of their leadership killed. And then, if they are breathing at the end of it, they claim victory. The Houthis are playing the same game. It's really, honestly, cowardly sort of stuff. Nasser al-Din Amiri,
He calls them cowards. The Palestinians are cowards because they've been carpet bombed by Israel and they've lost so many people, yet they've still managed to survive. It's really cowardly stuff. No, you know what's really cowardly stuff is carpet bombing residential neighborhoods and then claiming victory and then claiming that you had to do it to fight Hamas. You know, it's even more cowardly than that. Sitting like a chubby, soft little pussy in your news studio at the Daily Wire and talking about the people of Palestine like that and calling them cowards when you've never been in a fight in your life, when you graduated from an Ivy League institution and you're paid good money to be a mouthpiece for empire. That's what's really cowardly stuff, Ben Shapiro, you soft little croissant turned to life.
A mouthpiece that has lip fillers, by the
way. He does?
Yeah, you haven't seen the comparison videos of the younger Ben where it's just a straight, lip and then the lip fillers that he's done?
No, but that's hilarious.
Yeah, he has lip fillers.
Wow. Pampered Ben.
Cowardly stuff. He's sitting in the studio making millions of dollars a year, maybe millions of dollars a month.
Oh, Glenn's going to say the same thing as me. I didn't make it to this point.
To cheer the deployment of American troops in that region to defend this foreign country that he acknowledges he has a great deal of loyalty to and love for. The Houthis are confronting the most powerful military in the world and are saying they're going to continue to do it because of the cause that they believe in, which is trying to get imposed.
After they've been bombed for 9 years now by Saudi Arabia with U.S.-funded bombs and U.S.-funded jets, and still managed to survive, and to the point where Saudi Arabia, when the U.S. was launching Operation Prosperity Guardian, they're like, don't do it. You can't beat the Houthis. We bombed them since 2015, and they're still here. Yet Ben Shapiro, with his butt lip, plastic surgery and lip filler, getting paid millions of dollars in the Daily Wire studio, thinks they're cowards. I mean, it's unreal. We live in a clown world.
So some cost on Israel and the United States for killing an enormous number of civilians in Gaza and destroying civilian Palestinian life. Now, whatever else you want to say about the Houthis, what they are doing is not cowardly. Cowardly is sitting in a studio, sending other people to war for your pleasure or for your agenda. That's cowardly. Spending your whole life demanding more and more wars that you and your family never go fight. That's cowardly. Cowardly is not what the Houthis are doing, whatever else you might want to think about them.
The official told the Wall Street Journal, this is a brutal aggression. I love this. It's a brutal aggression. Amir, a Houthi official told the Wall Street Journal, this is a brutal aggression. I love this. It's a brutal aggression. Honest to God. If America and its allies wanted to commit quote, brutal aggression against the Houthis, this guy would not be alive to talk about it. So they will undoubtedly pay its price. We will not waver in our stance to support the Palestinian people, regardless of the cost. After the coalition strikes, the U.S. had not seen any direct retaliatory action directed toward U.S. or other coalition members in the Red Sea. And again, the strikes came with a lot of warning. 1 week ago, the U.S., Britain, key allies issued an ultimatum saying stop it. And then they didn't stop it. And then on New Year's Day, Biden convened his national security team to discuss the options. And then despite coalition warning, the Houthis fired an anti-ship ballistic missile that fell into the water within sight of a commercial vessel. Now, the Houthis knew that the United States and its allies were going to strike all of these targets, and so they'd relocated some of their weapons and equipment and fortified others. The question is whether this is going to deter further action from the Houthis. The answer is probably not. When you telegraph punches like this, it is very
This is the kind of arrogance you get at the height of an empire in collapse. You know, this idea that, oh, we could have gone in and destroyed the Houthis if we wanted to. Well, not really. Not really. You've been trying since 2015 using Saudi Arabia and Israel as proxies and bombing the piss out of them. Guess what it's done? It's infuriated the people of Yemen and allowed the Houthis to recruit more. Because the Houthis say, guess what? We want economic development and we want the Western world out of here and we want Israel out of here. We want U.S. proxies to stop bombing us. And when you're constantly getting bombed by Israel and Saudi Arabia and the United States, that's an appealing message, which is why the Houthis have only grown in power since the U.S. has tried to wipe them out. But Shapiro is so ignorant. He's so used to the U.S. being the dominant unipolar force in the world and backing Israel every step of the way that he thinks they could just wipe the Houthis off the map at any point, wipe Hezbollah off the map at any point. But they can't. And Israel can't wipe Hamas off the map at any point. And these organizations have actually grown stronger in response to the extremely aggressive and murderous actions of Israel, the U.S., and Saudi Arabia, which have killed so many civilians, which is we covered on the show last time, that journalist who interviewed a Hezbollah fighter, and she asked him, why do you fight? And he takes her to a mass grave and shows her all these children who were killed by, a U.S. airstrike. Says, this is why I fight. Wouldn't you fight if they were doing this to your home country? So that's the kind of mindset and how U.S. aggression has driven recruitment. And Ben Shapiro is just completely delusional about the situation. He has no idea what he's talking about, or he's distorting it on purpose.
No, they're just steeped in imperial hubris. And, this isn't unique. You go back to any empire in decay, and you find something similar. One of the most relevant texts in ancient Greek writings is Pericles' funeral oration from Thucydides during the Peloponnesian War, where he's talking about the greatness of his state and the superiority of its citizens over everyone else, and how that superiority affords it the right to conquer and to do all these different things and to win. And then they lose. So it's I think it's a clear case example of what we're seeing right now from the U.S. I mean, there hasn't been any actually successful geopolitical maneuver that they've been able to finish. They lost. I think it's very clear to everyone that even Blinken was admitting it before the end of the year that it's a loss in the proxy war against Russia. It's a loss against Afghanistan. And I think that if they're crazy enough to take up a fight against the axis of resistance in Western Asia, it's very clear that they're going to lose.
Absolutely. Let's see what Greenwald says about this, then we'll go to the next segment.
Unlikely that is going to convince the Houthis to stop what they are doing.
No, I agree with him there too. This is very unlikely to be the end of this escalation. This war is likely to go on, which means we have a new Middle East war. The question is for how long it will go on, for how many more exchanges of violence will it entail, how many people will be killed, how much retaliation will there be. Ben Shapiro seems extremely unbothered by those questions. Ones that should have been debated in Congress that we should still be debating now, because what he wants is what he has. That's why he's so happy. Namely, the exploitation of the most powerful military in the world in defense of this foreign country and its deployment against its enemies. But if you're somebody looking at it from an American perspective, those ought to be of great concern to you. He's saying this is almost certainly not the end of it, just the beginning. Which means we've now bought ourselves another war of exactly the kind that Joe Biden was running.
Which is what the same thing that Netanyahu said on fucking Christmas. This is going to be a long war. We're not anywhere near done. This is going to take quite a while.
Right. And he says, he makes the same argument that I was saying Tucker Carlson made. Yeah. Where he says, this is not good for America. If you're someone who cares about the United States, you should be concerned about this. But Shapiro's only concerned about the U.S. defending Israel and using their military forces to prop up Israel and attack their enemies.
And that shows, I think, a crisis in super patriotism. Because these were the people that would have traditionally been the ideological agents of super patriotism, of that my country is always right sort of patriotism that Parenti so eloquently critiques in favor of an actual, proletarian socialist patriotism. But these people are coming to see that there's literally no benefit for the American people at large, even for a national American bourgeoisie, if there even is still one, which I think there is. It's not very large, but it's just all these actions are always just done in the interest of empire and the global financial big bourgeoisie. And it becomes evident to anyone that's even slightly bit concerned with America and the American people that none of these actions benefit us, that we're sending billions abroad to kill literal fucking children while our country's going to shit. while we have in most major cities people just walking around in basically zombie towns, while there's 60,000 people that are dying from overdoses, while there's 45,000 dying from lack of insurance, while there's 600,000 wandering around as homeless, and in a fucking country that's 33 times more empty homes than homeless people. The statistics can go on. You can write a whole volume on how fucked up the situation has gotten here in the U.S. in terms of debt, in terms of poverty, in terms of an inability to pay for the things they need to survive at the end of the month. All the while this is happening, and we're sending billions and billions abroad. So, the fact that Tucker Carlson is calling it out, and other people on the America First right, it shows that there's perhaps a crisis in super patriotism, where the super patriots are, specifically the ideologues, are losing some of that "my country is always right," even when it affects my people, ethos that it contained for a very long time.
Based. Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, that was a good segment, good breakdown. I really like Greenwald's show. I feel like he has good analysis there. I think next we should move to a story that's a little bit lighter. I mean, it's still not good. It's devastating for the people of Argentina, now that they're being run by a libertarian comic book villain named Javier Milei, who looks like he was ripped straight out of like TikTok or something. I deal with all these libertarians on TikTok, like that Prax Ben kid. It's like he's one of those TikTok kids has been allowed to run a country. One of these people who believes that like the kid who told us in the Communists vs. Libertarians debate that I still believe ANCAP can work. Except that was a 15-year-old who spends too much time online, and this is an adult running a country. But of course, forever, right-wingers and libertarians have pointed to Venezuela and said, look, socialism fails. And what they're actually pointing at is the economic sabotage of the United States in a country that was made heavily dependent on oil exports by years of Western colonialism and the extraction of oil from Venezuela by Western multinationals. But now you have Argentina in the first days of libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism, spiraling into an inflation crisis that has put the nation on a path to surpass Venezuela as the country with the fastest price increases in Latin America. So Milei has been cutting government subsidies, firing thousands of government workers, destabilizing the economy as he begs for more Western investors to come into the country and capitalize on cheap resources and cheap labor. So this is libertarianism in action, especially in a country in the global South. All you're doing with libertarianism and by getting rid of any kind of protectionism and government subsidies for local producers is allowing Western multinationals to pillage your economy. It's no different than the shock therapy that was induced on former socialist countries when their state industries were all privatized and handed over to Western multinationals to the detriment of the working and poor people in the country. So here, my tweet went sort of viral. This is Javier Milei, the clown president of Argentina. Will Argentina become the world's first fourth world country? We're finding out now. Sorry to people from Argentina, but this is too funny.
No, it's hilarious, and it's really a tragedy because if you're an Argentinian in that election, you had two options: either the basic quote unquote centrist neoliberalism that had destroyed your country and that you came to hate, or this guy that's passing himself as a radical, as someone who's going to overturn the rule of the communists. And we know it's not that. He's just gotten the route of neoliberalism and injected it with steroids. There's nothing radical about that, but there was literally no alternative, which is the travesty and maybe the dire conditions that Milei is going to put the country in. Wakes some people up. It wakes the communists and socialists and grassroots organizations up to the necessity of an alternative, viable political option, so that the people are not forced to choose between someone like Milei, and which is in many ways a repetition of Macri, And then someone like Massa, who in his campaign rhetoric was literally just repeating what Southcom had told at the beginning of the year the Argentinians. What Southcom said that they would like to see out of Argentinian politics. It was almost like word for word the same rhetoric, and this was something that was told by me by one of the leading communist intellectuals, Beatriz Raglan in Argentina, who painted it as like, what the fuck is the option? Yeah, a lot of people on the left said, well, let's damage control, let's vote for Massa, but the masses weren't thinking in terms of damage control. There's a lot of young people that see a futureless future in front of them, and they have this idiot painting himself as someone who's going to bring about an alternative. The first thing he does when he gets into office is legalize the ability of employers to pay their employees with meat and milk, which is just it's ludicrous. It's just completely absurd. He had some ideas of like privatizing roads. The communist intellectual that I got to hang out with in Mexico, she actually played a part in a commercial of this old lady. She's 85 years old, who is attempting to walk to her home after Milei has been elected, and there's like guards outside asking her to pay in order for her to walk into the street where her apartment is at, because that was one of the policies that he had suggested. And it's interesting because, as you mentioned, one of the big things that they always bring up, specifically with like Venezuela, is inflation. Socialism leads to inflation and all these horrible things. Compare the inflation of Milei, a presidency that just started, with the inflation of Lula. Lula has been able to lower inflation. He's been able to improve the conditions, the purchasing power of regular people in Brazil. Well, he's not a socialist, but of course, a strong social democrat, working class base. So, yeah.
Yeah, I went and watched Vivek Ramaswamy recently because he was in my area, and he actually said that his first term in office, he'd make Javier Milei look like a moderate, which I'm like, that's such a stupid thing to say based on the economic situation in Argentina right now, and like the crackdowns on protests and stuff like that. It's unbelievable. But the main thing I noticed listening to Vivek is just the inconsistency of the libertarian ideology, because he is a Milei type candidate. He says, I'm a revolutionary, not a reformist, specifically. He says specifically, I am the outsider in this race. They want to portray themselves as revolutionaries because they're anti-government, but they're not willing to use the government, to use the state to crack down on the private sector, to crack down on Wall Street, which is the source of our problems, right? Vivek and these guys talk about getting rid of the FBI or whatever, but the FBI and CIA are just apparatuses that serve finance capital. If you don't do anything about the finance capital, imperialism will find other ways. It'll find other apparatus. That's what the NED is, the National Endowment for Democracy. When people were getting critical of the CIA, the NED was created to do what the CIA does privately, but not attached to the government. So the libertarian ideology is so inconsistent. With Milei, he claims to be anti-state. He claims to be anti-government, yet he's cracking down brutally on protests using the country's police force, and he's proposing a new law. I had a friend from Argentina send me this on TikTok. He's proposing a new law that protesters will have to pay the state the cost that it costs the state to send police to suppress the protest. So not only are we going to send the police in riot gear to beat you and suppress the protest, but then we're going to send you a bill in the mail and charge you for it, which, is essentially making protesting illegal. And he said the bill would be enforced by recording people. So he wants to turn Argentina into literally 1984, bro, which is a meme. But it's the inconsistency of libertarianism, because they say they're anti-state. They say they're anti-government, but then when it comes to using the state or the government at the behest of capital, they're all for it. What they mean by being anti-state and anti-government is anti-state government intervention with the interests of corporations, having no minimum wage laws, having no regulations on corporations. And then not only is he cracking down on protesters in his own country, but he supports Israel. He supports Israel. And I do know some more consistent libertarians like the girl Hannah, who I debated on Jubilee, and like their ideas and their ideology is still silly, but at least she'll be consistent and be like, yeah, I'm against what Israel's doing. I'm not going to say I'm anti-government, I'm anti-state, and then support an apartheid state that's massacring children. But that's what Milei does. It's the epitome of libertarianism. We're anti-state, we're anti-government. Oh, what about that state that's genociding an entire population of people? What about the state committing ethnic cleansing? Oh, no, I love that state. They're doing a great job. Well, what the hell are you talking about then? What the hell is your ideology other than just being a simp to power while you pretend to be a revolutionary?
What they're against is the state when it is open to winning reforms on the basis of working class people's struggles that benefit working people. The state as an apparatus that has a monopoly of power and violence that it can use in order to defend private property, that state they're perfectly fine with. Someone had mentioned something about Milei's relationship to Trump, Milei being anti-Trump. It's very interesting because he said, and he said this in the Tucker Carlson interview, he praised Trump, he supported Trump, and every time he's talked about Trump, he's been supportive of Trump. In many ways, the boost that Macri's economy got, the last right-wing or far-right government that Argentina had, was thanks to Trump and the actions that he promoted the IMF to take with Argentina. But one of the things that's central to the Trump base in the U.S. is a critique of what they call the globalist and the World Economic Forum and figures like Klaus Schwab. What has Klaus Schwab said of Milei? He's completely praised him as someone finally bringing freedom and free markets to Argentina. So these are the points of tension where if you're talking with your coworkers, with your people in your community who might like Trump, who might have that more critical worldview of what they call globalism, Klaus Schwab and all these people, and have some libertarian ideas, you point this out, and it's an objective contradiction right there. How is someone like Klaus Schwab, the embodiment of the globalism that they claim to oppose, going to praise Milei in the way in which he's been praising him? Some might even say, and perhaps DeSantis is an example of this, that some of the quote-unquote right-wing populist resurgence that really starts with Trump, and some people would say that it gets extended with Bolsonaro and others, that the ruling class has had to develop almost like an alternative to that, which you see in people like DeSantis, which you see in people like Vivek Ramaswamy, and which perhaps you see in people like Milei, because you have part of the Trumpist rhetoric, but the substantial part that placed Trump in a anti-deep state, anti-establishment position, which is what I think a lot of the base attached themselves to, that part is completely absent in a figure like Milei.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting to follow as it develops. It's one of the stories I've been covering a lot on TikTok, just following Argentina, because I really see it as like the U.S. has tried so hard to demonize Venezuela, but Argentina is a laboratory for libertarianism, and we're seeing the effects of it right now. And of course, Venezuela's problems aren't really due to socialism. Socialism in Venezuela expanded their healthcare system, decreased malnutrition, built tons of schools, gave old people pensions for the first time. One of the most amazing accomplishments of the Bolivarian Revolution, to be honest, is allowing all those people to retire. And the U.S. has done everything they can to sabotage it, because a lot of that is funded by oil exports, which there are reasons for that, which are rooted in colonialism, of course. So it's not actually like socialism failed in Venezuela, but libertarianism really is failing in Argentina. In the sense that libertarianism is even a coherent ideology, which you could argue that it's not. But thank you, QWERTY, for the super chat. The People's Funded Institute, getting some funds from the people. Thank you very much. So-called freedom lovers love the state with AI machine guns pointed at Palestinians. Definitely not an authoritarian police state. So much freedom. Exactly. Flying drones around, telling the Palestinians to leave or die. That's not an oppressive state. Libertarians must support this. Thank you, QWERTY. Are you guys going to talk about Hassan talking to Timothy Chalamet? Yeah, I should have asked the guy to come on for an interview. So I was actually messaging the guy on TikTok. My TikTok about the hot Houthi, the hot Yemeni pirate went viral. And I felt kind of bad because it got over 600,000 views. And then the dude started getting a bunch of followers and immediately got fucking banned. So I'm like, shit, I got the hot Houthi banned. But then he made another account and went on Hassan Piker's show. But yeah, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, there was Yemeni.
Wait. The first thing you say in 3 seconds, I'll buy for you. 3 minutes. Nike? Yeah. All right, where's Nike?
Oh, I had to open TikTok. It's such a cringe app outside of our account. But yeah, where is it? So it has 800,000 views now. So yeah, where here's
Have y'all seen the hot Yemeni TikTok pirate? LOL. No, I haven't seen this man. How has this guy not come up on my For You page? I need to meet him. We must have a conversation. Tag this man in my comments, please. Have y'all seen the hot Yemeni?
So we did have a conversation, and yeah, he told me the Yemeni people are not going to give up. Yeah, and Ben Shapiro said they're getting pummeled by the U.S. They're getting destroyed. They might as well quit now. This guy was like, we do not care. He said, like, we do not care, and we are going to retaliate. So shout out to Timothy Chalamet.
No, I love these videos because it humanizes the people that are so often demonized and dehumanized by our media. So yeah, hopefully we can still get in contact with him. It'd be cool to talk to him and see what his thoughts are on the operations at the U.S. and the U.K. It's funny because it's the U.S. and the U.K. Even though a whole host of other Western, basically NATO countries signed on to the warning, it's been so far only the U.S. and the U.K. that have been bombing the Yemenis. But to get his thoughts on what's going on.
Absolutely, yeah, it'd be real cool. Got some more super chats, but I want to answer this. What are your thoughts on David Pakman and his con scheming show? Can we agree he's a rabid kleptocratic manic Zionist shell? Yeah, he doesn't even pretend to be a social democrat anymore. Just a complete neoliberal Biden simp. And I was trying to find the video, but I can't find it. Noah and I both had somewhat tweets that got quite a bit of traction criticizing Pakman, because in the past, if you look at any of the videos I've done about Pakman on this channel, every time I watch him, I'm like, for one, I think he's wrong, and for two, I feel like he's so condescending. He just talks down to people, and that's just something I notice in the way that he interacts with people that I just do not vibe with at all on a human level. It's just not how any of us at the Institute interact with people. And then there was this video recently of someone telling him the economy's bad, dude. I'm struggling. I can't afford groceries. And Pakman's like, well, I look at the data, and the data says the Biden economy is good. And then he cherry picks data points about GDP and other bullshit that only measures the profit of shareholders. And even as Noah pointed out, GDP includes money that the banks make off of us through trapping us in debt and getting us to pay off our debt with interest. So, that's not a measure of how well the people are doing. It's a measure of how shitty the people are doing, how thoroughly they're being super exploited, triple exploited, or double exploited. I don't know. We've been talking about these concepts of double and triple exploitation lately. It kind of has my brain confused. But yeah, Pakman sucks. And I told my dad he should watch Pakman a while ago, which shows how much I've grown. But yeah, he used to be better than he is now.
Well, he represents a lot of the more quote-unquote centrist wing of the former Bernie Warren progressive movement, who a lot of them have been writing op-eds talking about, well, the economy's doing good, look at these metrics, but the popularity levels of Biden are at a record low. And that was bound to happen. These metrics have no relationship to the actual well-being of the American people. Like you said, how does GDP growth influence at all the living standard of the American people? So that disconnection is becoming more apparent, and because they can't even question or look concretely at what these metrics actually stand for, and the disconnection they have from regular folk, they're left with this quandary, with this apparent contradiction between good economy and low ratings. Yeah, good economy for fucking who? For the elite, for big business monopolies. That's the only people that are doing great with Biden, the people whom he promised when he was campaigning that he was going to rule in their interest. So, uh, Pac-Man is just another one of these figures puzzled by something that is apparent to anyone who's not living as well off as he is.
And he used to argue for like a social safety net. He had a good video talking about how much leftover money there is in the government that could pay for social safety programs. So, a bit of a technocratic, progressive liberal / social democrat. But nowadays it's nothing but pro-Biden, pro-Israel, and being really condescending towards anyone who's not. So here's the video. I found it. So Pac-Man perfectly epitomizes the condescending attitude of the professional managerial class. 319 likes. And Craig versus Capitalism is a Jimmy Dore guy who I like to follow, who said, "You don't hate these people enough." He's very working class, by the way. He's worth a follow. He says, "You don't hate these people enough. You think you do, but you don't," which I think is true. Like I said, I recommended Pac-Man back to my dad back in the day, and now it's like, why would I recommend this guy to anyone? He pretends to be a social democrat. He pretends to be a progressive. He pretends to be a friend of the socialist left. But he's our enemy, and we need to recognize him as such. We need to recognize the compatible left for what they are, stooges of the ruling class who capture revolutionary energy. So here's the video in question.
David, why are you acting like the economy is so booming and good?
Because I look at the data. This is not a show about my opinion. My opinion is irrelevant. I'm looking at the data, and that's why I say that.
And that's so arrogant to think. Like we believe, that the truth is revolutionary, and everything that we tell you is based on facts, and what we're trying to do is tell you the truth. But none of us would say that we're unbiased, right? We all have our biases, and we give you our opinion on this show to argue, and this is something only liberals do, argue that they don't have an ideology. They're unbiased. They're just speaking objectively based on the data. I'm not manipulating the data to make it look like my preferred political candidate, Joe Biden, is good. Even though in every statistics class, the first thing they'll teach you is that data is manipulated by journalists for political ends. I'm unbiased. I'm objective. No, you're not. And do you realize how much ego it takes to believe that you are?
The economy.
Sorry.
Just the paradox. Well, it's not really a paradox, but the reality is, if we want to be maybe cynical about it, that Pac-Man is right. According to their metrics, the economy is working. Because there's no such thing as an economy in general. There's specific types of economies corresponding to various modes of life. For the capitalist mode of life, an economy is quote unquote working when it makes exuberant profits for the ultra rich, and when it keeps a vast pool of people in poverty, desperation, and precarity. So yeah, all of the metrics that help capitalists figure out whether their economy is working show that yes, it's working. What does that mean for the people? It's not working for the people. It's the complete opposite. So I think the caller's working with an understanding of an economy should be working for the people. I should have some relation with the people. And Pac-Man's working with an explicit, bourgeois understanding of what economy and its metrics are designed to explain.
They're both speaking from their class position.
He is good.
The economy is absolute trash.
Oh.
There are no jobs.
Oh, we actually have record low unemployment.
Everything is so freaking expensive.
Inflation was 0 in October, 0.1 in November, and year-over-year inflation is down to 3.1%.
Interest rates are through the roof.
Interest rates are down 2 points and coming down further.
Kids can't even buy a house.
Well, okay. Kids can't even buy a house. I don't know what age you're thinking of. That part may be true.
What would you be doing if you weren't doing YouTube, man?
By the way, 60% of Americans experience medical debt. Medical debt. 60% of the country gets indebted by the healthcare system. That's not even to mention all the other parasitic forms of debt that people are paying to the big banks. The only people that this economy is working for, the big banks. But he, technocratic Biden liberal David Pac-Man says, well, interest rates haven't been spiking in the last few months, so the economy is doing great.
It'd probably be
Everybody's drowning in debt, my guy. Everyone who doesn't have a successful little YouTube channel where they say the same thing every week.
working in finance, to be honest. I was all set to go into finance
And then they pulled me into podcasting. I did
And then the CIA pulled me into podcasting.
everything right and they indicted me. No, I would almost certainly be working in finance, yeah.
I mean, you have to sit there and talk crap about Trump every single day to put food on your table, man.
I don't have to. I choose to, sir. And that's a big difference.
If you didn't have that, you'd be totally screwed, man.
Right.
But I'm telling you this right here. There is no jobs. Nobody is spending money.
Jeez, I'm sorry to hear that, Joey. Joey's a friend of the show. 33K in medical debt for getting sick, for needing chronic treatment. And this guy who literally, as he's getting called out by this working class Trump supporter here, this guy who just makes tons and tons of money by shit talking Trump on his show every day, the easiest, hackiest, Rachel Maddow-esque political analysis you can possibly do, just Trump bashing. Trump is mean. Oh, Trump is mean. Look at what he tweeted this week. He's making tons of money doing that and saying the economy is awesome when working class people have $33,000 because they need health care. These people are gross.
Actually, GDP has been up dramatically.
The economy is in the hole. I'm not talking about Trump or Biden. I'm not saying right or left, red or blue. I'm telling you the facts.
And this guy's spitting.
Well, this is excellent. I want them to react like this.
Yeah.
I don't want them to be giving cynical responses to try to get on the good side of working people. React with what you actually think. React with what you actually feel. What he actually feels is fuck working people. Fuck working class Americans. The economy and its metrics based on the interests of the capitalist class tells me it's doing good. It's doing good for me. So you're wrong. And I'm going to tell you you're wrong in as condescending a form as possible. And we should applaud that. We should applaud that. You know why? Because there's no way in hell regular working people listening to this middle class jagoff are going to end up supporting his ilk. And if we as communists end up replicating a different form of that middle class condescension that he's expressing towards working people, we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah.
We're shooting ourselves in the foot. We have to be grounded in the people in order to lead them as communists. You know, you don't lead by being so far ahead, quote unquote, ahead, that you're just completely disconnected from the people. You have to be grounded in the people in order to move forward with them. And you can't do that if you're being condescending to working class people in a very middle class manner like this guy is.
Right. He looks at the working class who, you know, is a lot of them support the populist right because they're the only people talking about working class issues at all. And he just gets angry like, oh, you dirty workers are messing things up for me. You're messing things up for me by not supporting Biden and saying the economy is great because you feel that in your everyday life that the economy isn't doing great, that you're just scraping by. And that's how people fall into Trump this is, you know, what they see as the left is this condescension, this middle class condescension. No, shut up. The economy is going great. And Trump says, no, the economy's not doing good. We're going to make America great again. We're going to bring the jobs back. You know, we're going to get out of Iraq and all these places. And they're like, okay, I like that guy. That guy sounds like the better option. And as communists, we cannot do that, right? We need to understand the appeal of the populist right, why there's such an appeal of the populist right to working class people, and offer them a legitimate alternative, not talk down to them because they won't vote for Biden at some of the biggest communist party in this country.
The economy is in the dumps.
I would love it if he was able to present a single statistic that suggests that. We don't have a perfect economy. And again, you know, we started at the top of the show by pointing out, just because they're lying about oil production being down when it's actually up, doesn't mean we like using oil as a source of energy. They are lying about oil production being down, and I wish it were, and that we were getting off of oil and going over to green energy. In the same way, just because the economy is doing really well by all historical metrics, doesn't mean that we say, hey, I'm satisfied, we don't need to do any better. There are people without access to healthcare. 40% of the country can't meet an unexpected $1,000 expense without putting it on a credit card or borrowing from friends and family or otherwise going into debt. Wages have not kept up with inflation over the longer period of time. There's a whole list of problems, but we are doing way better than we were. We are not the be-all end-all of a Northern European style democracy and economy, but we have made improvements. And we have to recognize that if you are measuring how well the economy is doing differently depending on who's president, then you're being biased.
Which is exactly what he's doing. And he shows at the end there he's not too stupid. You know, he recognizes that the economy really isn't doing well. But he cherry picks statistics to make it look like the economy is doing marginally better under Biden than it was under Trump, and then ends his segment by saying you shouldn't cherry pick statistics based on your preferred candidate. The irony. You're muted, Los.
So how's this for some fucking statistics? Heading into 2024, child poverty up 138%, homelessness up 12%, 13.3 million Americans kicked off Medicaid, 43.6 million owe 1.77 trillion in student debt, 100 million buried in medical debt, real weekly wages $45.83 lower than in 1973. 62% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So these are not these abstract statistics. These are tied to things getting worse. Things getting worse. Poverty up 138%. These are things getting worse. Not just, oh, they go a little down, but it was really bad before, so it still looks bad, but it's getting better. No, it's getting fucking worse. And it's getting worse while we're sending hundreds of billions of dollars to fascist states abroad in order to wage proxy wars against the enemies of American imperialism, who in reality are not the enemies of the American people. On the contrary, they're fighting our enemy, which is the people who exploit us, who keep us oppressed, who indebt us, and who make our lives fucking miserable, while sending their fucking ideologues in the form of Pac-Mans and others to tell us in a very condescending manner that we should just shut up because their bourgeois statistics say otherwise in regards to our suffering under this wretched system.
For sure. Carla, can you drop the link to that tweet in the chat? People were asking for it. But yeah, absolutely. I guess we should cover the super chats here. Thank you so much, Daniel. So, hi, comrades. I know this is off topic. Do you think that G did the right thing to crack down on bug techs in China? I had not heard about that, actually. But G is a god. You know, Marxism is about worshiping our leaders like they're deities. So before I've even researched it, just know that I support G. Just kidding. I'll have to look at it, though. It sounds interesting. Crackdown on bug techs in China. I'll look into it, and then maybe we'll circle back to that. But thank you so much for the $5 super chat, Daniel. There's still a lot of people who say that should give Malay time, that he's going to fix everything. Oh, I'm sure they are saying that. I'm sure the libertarians are coping. Yeah, I see a lot of them saying too, like, no, the economy was in crisis before Malay took over, even though he's exacerbating the crisis and making it way worse. And neoliberalism was what led to the crisis in general. But it's just funny because libertarians they always want to compare socialist countries to like the US and the British Empire and say, look, their GDP isn't as high. That proves capitalism is superior. They never want to compare Cuba to what it was like before the revolution. Right? They never want to compare China to what it was like before the revolution, because then they'd have to admit that the revolution made enormous gains for people. But when it comes to Argentina, libertarian Argentina, the economy immediately crashes and they're like, well, it's not our fault. It was crashing beforehand. You have to look at the economy we inherited. And why don't you ever do that for socialist countries, guys?
And then they'll say it's not real libertarianism at some point.
Right.
That'll be the go-to.
Yeah, just like utopian socialists, ironically.
By the way, Daniel meant to say big tech, not bug tech.
Oh, well, then I definitely support it, probably. Beijing's discipline of the tech sector wiped out trillions of dollars in market value. Okay, this looks like a pretty
yeah, that's something we're gonna have to get back to you on.
Article. But yeah, I'm gonna have to look into it. But
as a general trend, I'm sorry, go ahead, Eddie.
I was just gonna say, like, obviously China still has the market sector, and that unleashes what they call the animal spirits of the market, which just means the machinations of capitalism that Karl Marx analyzes so well in Capital, and Marxists and Chinese scholars have expanded on since. So they understand the dynamics of the market and that capitalism leads to accumulation and concentration. So there's constant need to crack down on the private parts of their economy, the private sector. And that's what the party and the state and the central plans are there for. So I assume this is just part of that. And there's also a huge problem with American companies stealing Chinese data, which is just hilarious because that's what they accuse China of doing. That's what America and propaganda accuses China of doing. It's always projection.
Which is interesting because China never stole data. I mean, if they would have, we would have supported them because that's an anti-colonial move. One of the essential characteristics of neocolonialism and the keeping of a colonized country independency is that you keep them as low-tech producers. You don't let them develop the forces of production. It's central to imperialism, and it gets intensified in its higher stages. China has broken through that. It's developed in the sciences and technologies and all these other sectors in ways that now it is surpassing the West, and it's leading to a reverse effect where it is American companies that are starting to steal Chinese tech. If you look at the sector of 3D printing, China is far ahead of the United States. If you look at many sectors relating to computers, it is leaps and bounds ahead. And I'm not a computer scientist, I'm not a specialist in this area, but all of the material that I've been able to see, it's evident that in terms of technologies, China is far ahead, so much so that that reverse process of Western companies stealing from China has now become a reality. And I haven't seen any of these stories of crackdowns, but I know that there have been crackdowns in that.
Yeah, it's interesting too because the Western sources analyze it, saying China wipes out 1.1 trillion from the Chinese big tech market. So they're analyzing it from a bourgeois perspective, from the perspective of neoclassical economics, and just saying market value decreased. Therefore, this is, the implication being this is bad. But if you read what the Chinese central planners are saying about it, they're like, yeah, this is what we meant to do. Crack down on the tech sector. They're not that worried about the loss of market value because the goal of their economy is to serve the people. It's not to produce value for shareholders necessarily. Biden is to the right of Trump. Actions indicate. Thank you so much for the $279 super chat, Cordy. Yes, thank you. I was reading today Dan Kovalik's excellent book, The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela, how the U.S. is orchestrating a coup for oil. Very accessible and awesome book filled with geopolitical analysis and history from someone who's been involved in the class struggle and union organizing. He really writes that book from a working class perspective. Can't say enough good things about Professor Kovalik. Follow him on Twitter. But I was reading that book and read about how Trump ramped up sanctions on Venezuela. And I'm just like, why can't he just go all out and actually be an anti-imperialist? He does anti-imperialist rhetoric, and then he puts John Bolton, Elliot Abrams, and Mike Pompeo in charge of his foreign policy. But compared to Biden, with this horrendous war in Ukraine, which Trump furthered, but not as quickly and chaotically as Biden, and with backing the genocide in Gaza, the bombing of Somalia, all these things. I mean, I think you can at least make the argument that Biden is to the right of Trump. It's hard to define what that actually means, but yeah, it's not an insane thing to say, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the centerpieces of providing a structural systematic analysis is never putting so much weight on individuals, even if they occupy the highest offices. What we're seeing is the imperialist system unfold. That's it. It's a continuity of the imperialist system. And whatever differences we might see in whatever regime is in power, they're accidental differences. The substance is still U.S. imperialism having to defend itself with whatever puppet ends up winning and being chosen by the ruling class in that 4-year period.
We need you guys to start doing spaces on X. I almost did one the other day, and then I bailed. I'm like, whatever, we live stream on X. That's good enough. But yeah, I want to start utilizing that. I know Noah has done some. Maybe I'll start doing it next time I'm bored, waiting midday for a wrestling practice to start or something. But thank you so much for the $5 super chat, Joey. Appreciate you. One more that we had start. Is anyone here going to vote? I really want to vote for Claudia and Karina, but curious what everyone's thoughts are. I don't know. I'll vote for them or Cornell. I'm not voting for either of the two major candidates. I don't feel that strongly about it. I mean, Cornell is good. And the PSL candidates are obviously good on the big issues. Better than the mainstream candidates. RFK's garbage. I'm totally over him. Completely and totally, based on his Zionism and based on him recently defending his uncle for wiretapping MLK. He said that the only reason they wiretapped MLK is so they could prove to J. Edgar Hoover that he wasn't a bad guy. It's like, whatever, bro. Nobody buys that. Nobody buys that, the U.S. state was spying on MLK to prove that he's a good guy to the deep state, to the intelligence agencies. And even if they did, that's still unethical. The ends don't justify the means. So that combined with his Zionism and hiring that rabid Zionist Rabbi Shmuley, the rabid rabbi, Rabbi Schmuck as an advisor. Can't do it with him.
Yeah, it's tough. We were so excited about Cornell when he launched, but it's I'd be dishonest if I didn't mention that from an organizing point of view, it's been kind of a disappointment. I wish he would have just planted the egg and fought on the basis of a solid organizational base, but that's not the case. I mean, I don't think it would have been very likely that any non-dominant party candidate would have been able to win, but they could have created slits. They could have gotten funding. I mean, who knows what could have happened? The American people are definitely discontented with the two ruling parties. So, and I like the platform from the PSL. I mean, they're always the closest ones to our thought as Marxist-Leninists. We have, of course, some critiques about the organization and some tactics, but it's just I see it as a splitting of the left because it's also Jill Stein who's running on the side. I voted for Jill Stein in 2016, so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with this. I wish this was what was happening right now. I wish Cornel West announced for the People's Party and PSL, CBUSA, everybody got behind him, or someone like that and unified. But you don't have that on the left right now. There's so much division and infighting. So yeah, eventually, hopefully. I mean, I think it's gonna take almost a little bit of like a cult of personality in terms of a candidate to really unify working people. But yeah. So yeah, you want to go on to the next segment, Carlos, about the International Court of Justice?
Yeah, let me put that Credo article up. By the way, anyone who doesn't follow the Credo, make sure you do. They have some of the best geopolitical analysis out there. So as everyone should know, unless you've been living under a rock, South Africa, a country that fought a long and difficult struggle against an apartheid state, a white supremacist state that was ruling over it and won, has been the one that has taken Israel to the International Court of Justice, to The Hague, on the basis of violating the Geneva Convention on genocide. So I think there's something that's even more than just the symbolism of it being South Africa. It's the fact that a global South, global majority country is acting in such a way and playing such a large role in the most central event in geopolitics currently. Various specialists from John Merschmeyer to Pepe Escobar, who this article is from, and a few others have taken a look at the 84-page case that South Africa has made. And I believe the words that John Merschmeyer used is that it's bulletproof. I mean, it's hard to read those 84 pages and come out of it not being fully convinced that what Israel is doing is genocide, in part because you have explicit not just the data and the facts and the statistics, but you have explicit statements of genocidal intention from leading figures in the Israeli state. And of course, we've been covering this for the 100+ days, for the 3+ months that this intensification of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people has taken place. But I wanted to read a little bit here from the article from Pepe Escobar. He says the facts introduced from page 9 of the application are brutal, ranging from the indiscriminate massacre of civilians to mass expulsion. And it quotes the 84-page document. It is estimated that over 1.9 million Palestinians out of Gaza's population of 2.3 million people, approximately 85% of the population, have been forced to move from their homes. There is nowhere safe for them to flee to. Those who cannot leave or refuse to be displaced have been killed or are at extreme risk of being killed in their homes. So often we see the killing and these horrendous images that the fact that it's a genocide in the age of social media gives us access to seeing. But what we don't see is statistics like this. 85% of a population is displaced. And as he writes, there's no turning back. As was noted by Special Rapporteur on the human rights of internally displaced persons, Gaza's housing and civilian infrastructure has been razed to the ground, frustrating any realistic prospects for displaced Gazans to return home, repeating a long history of mass forced displacements of Palestinians by Israel. So it's basically a whole country, almost 9 out of 10 members of the Gaza part of Palestine who are in a condition that is extremely unlikely that they'll ever be able to return to home. And that home was, for many of them, a secondary home, because 70% of them are refugees who were kicked out from the original Nakba in 48. The Pepe continues by saying that item 142 of the application may encapsulate the whole drama. Quote, the entire population is facing starvation. 93% of the population in Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger, with more than 1 in 4 facing catastrophic conditions, with death imminent. We look at all these statistics, and as Danny Shaw always mentions, like the 20-something thousand dead, that's the number that's being used. It's an extremely conservative number. There's been many tens of thousands of people that just haven't been found. And with the lack of hospitals and access to food and water, who knows how many other people have died because of not just dying directly from the bombs, but from what the bombs and the blockade of Gaza has created. Against this backdrop, as we mentioned earlier, on fucking Christmas Day, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu doubled down on his genocidal rhetoric, promising, "We are not stopping. We are continuing to fight, and we are deepening the fight in the coming days. And this will be a long battle, and it is not close to being over." So I think if we think about how this looks at an international level, one, it's not good for Israel. I mean, it's very clear that the whole world is turning against it. And I mean, Eddie, maybe you could pull up the meme of South Africa being Hamas or something. It's just laughable at this point. But it also doesn't look good for, the state that Israel is a clientele state for, the U.S. So it's almost like a clientele state that has gone rogue. And there was this interesting, and I'll leave it to you now. There was this interesting quote that Netanyahu provided. Let me see if I can pull up the tweet. But he said, let me just reshare the screen. He said something very interesting that I gravitated to as a philosopher. He said, "Today we saw an upside-down world. Israel is accused of genocide while it is fighting against genocide." So it's insane, because the people that systematically turn the world on its head in order to legitimize their actions are complaining when they're faced with the upside down character of the reality that they have contortioned into looking right side up. They're forced to say that reality itself is upside down. So I say here, when those who turn the world on its head to achieve consent are forced to confront the world how it actually is, the world itself looks upside down. So But Eddie, what have been your thoughts on this ICJ affairs, and how do you think it's going to end up?
Yeah, I looked through the Israel's case because they made it publicly available, and it really, if you want to know the case against Israel and the case that Israel is committing a genocide, based on how that's defined in the UN's charter, that's the best resource available. It's also one of the most systematic resources just for understanding Israel's crimes in general. So South Africa, the ICJ isn't actually going to do anything, right? It's not actually going to take action against Israel probably, but what they're doing is exposing Israel's crimes to the world and giving people a resource in their case against Israel that they can use. How's it going to turn out? I don't know. Obviously, the ICJ doesn't really have the power to do anything, but like I said, it's more important because it's turning world public opinion against Israel. Like, I think obviously we all are in agreement here in our online or leftist communities. But I think we all know people in our personal lives who are still on the fence or who are still leaning towards supporting Israel. And to have a serious court like the International Court of Justice looking at Israel and looking at this case of genocide that's been laid out by lawyers and legal scholars, it's a really effective tool in convincing people that what Israel's doing is awful. And I hope the ICJ makes the correct decision and rules that they are doing a genocide. I had it pulled up too. But yeah, this is, of course, what Israel has to defend themselves with. South Africa is Hamas.
And it was so predictable. It was so predictable. And you listen to the Israeli Zionist pundits, and they're literally fulfilling the meme. So it's so ridiculous that I think if you're someone who stands on our side of history, on the side of working people and the oppressed and the anti-imperialist camp, it's glorious to see the decline of the U.S.'s colonial outposts in the Middle East and the way that we're seeing it. The tragedy is that, of course, it is an ongoing genocide, but it's losing in basically every single field. When it actually fights against Hamas, it loses. It's losing in the international courts. The only thing that it actually wins in is in the contest of bombing as many babies, women, and elderly as you possibly can. So that does not go unnoticed.
And yeah, but militarily, we don't even know that they're winning. I mean, it'll take a while for us to see, but they're certainly losing. The IDF is certainly losing a lot of forces in Gaza in the fighting with Hamas as they indiscriminately target civilians and, rack up the death toll. We don't know how many Hamas operatives or Hamas leaders they're actually killing. And what we're getting is video after video of Israeli tanks being destroyed. And I'd want to listen to the analysis of a military analyst like Scott Ritter. Obviously you could consider us geopolitical analysts, but our specialty is in analyzing military conflicts, but Scott's is, so it'd be interesting to have him on the show and talk to him about that specifically. But I see you got the Claire Daly video pulled up. Maybe it'd be a good time to go to that.
Yeah, this is this is a spine-chilling speech, as are most of Claire Daly and Mick Wallace's speeches. So, two of the great socialist leaders of our era. But let's listen in. Oh, I see that I don't have it pulled up right there.
Despite the catastrophic death toll it has inflicted, Israel is losing on the ground and in the court of public opinion. There's no way that this ends that doesn't leave Israel a pariah state with occupation and apartheid on borrowed time, and they know it. So they're doing everything they can. Desperate acts of aggression to provoke a wider conflict with Lebanon, with Iran, with anybody, to draw in the US, to save them from the consequences of their own actions. And as Yemen shows, Butcher Biden is reporting for duty. With Europe's proud genocide by his side, they are the ones who have enabled the continuation of Israeli terror. Without them, it would already be over. So take note, Butcher Biden. The ancestors of the Ireland that you claim to be from disown you. Keep our country out of your mouth. And as for von der Leyen and genocidal Germany, with your words and deeds supporting Israel in the ICJ, not in our name. The people of Europe stand with Palestine and with South Africa.
Damn.
Oof.
Damn. Hold on. Play.
Round of applause. No, it's tremendous. She's so inspiring, and the level of courage that you have to go in front of, a group of people that are vacillating from genocide supporters to genocide enablers through their silence and cowardice, and speak so boldly and so truthfully. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to see, and it's her. Like, that's been her consistently, whether it's with the proxy war against Russia or whether the genocide of the Palestinian people. She's been as consistent as you can hope any socialist leader would be. Definitely a very stark contrast to the pro-genocide, quote-unquote, socialists that we have here in the U.S., all of whom voted in favor of equating critique of the Zionist Nazi state with anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I mean, what a great time for heroes like this. I was just talking about, the undeniable usefulness of great leaders and charismatic leaders and, cult of personality, for lack of a better word, on the socialist left. And how awesome is it to have Claire Daly and Mick Wallace railing against the war in Ukraine and NATO's aggression towards Russia, and railing against Israel's genocide, when we have these imperialist sheepdogs like Bernie Sanders, AOC, Ilhan Omar, the Green Party in Germany, and all these, fake pseudo leftist parties that are supporting the genocide and supporting the Ukrainian fascist kleptocracy, full stop. And it's just so gross, and it's such a stark contrast to Claire Daly and Mick Wallace, who are standing up and showing us, giving us an example of this is what AOC and Bernie could be. This is what they would be if they were real anti-imperialists. Obviously, maybe they couldn't change things materially in an instant, but they could call this stuff out. They could draw public attention to it. They could try and move the Overton window so at least the other neoliberals and neocons in Congress don't feel so comfortable being brazenly imperialist, because they know they're at least going to get called out on it. Like right now, you can say just about anything. You can literally show up to Congress in an IDF uniform. That's what someone did earlier this year, and they're like, oh yeah, of course, the U.S. serves Israel. Why wouldn't our Congress people be wearing IDF uniforms? There's no pushback from the so-called socialist politicians and leaders we have.
Absolutely. And I guess to pivot into our next topic, which is, of course, connected, given that one of the things that Israel and the Zionists do in order to condemn Hamas is compare it to ISIS. There has been a resurgence of ISIS activity, interestingly enough, in all of the states that compose the axis of resistance. So states like Syria and Iraq and Iran, Yemen, Lebanon, and it's this article details sort of the relationship that the U.S. has had to ISIS and how it's actively aiding ISIS. So if I could just read a couple quotes from it. Let me see if I can find it. So here's an interesting passage. I'm missing. An early U.S. ISIS connection exists quite clearly. The terrorist group's founding and second-rank leaders were among the inmates of Camp Bucca prison in southern Iraq, an internment facility run by the U.S. military. The roster of high-value terrorists captured, then set free by the Americans is quite extraordinary. ISIS leader Abu Akar, and then it mentions all the other leaders that have been captured there. There's another quote here that I wanted to pull up. The religious officials of ISIS even say they used their time at the prison to obtain vows from prisoners to join the terrorist group after their release. So, what's going on? The prisoners that the U.S. had in Camp Bucca, they basically made some of them vow to join ISIS. If that's not absurd, because part of the reason why we legitimate continuing to have troops and sending even more troops, even though the Iraqi government has asked us to not send more troops and to stop occupying them, a government that's not at all like a strong anti-imperialist government. So we send these troops and we keep them there under the justification and rationalization that we're fighting ISIS, while at the same time, we create ISIS. It's almost like the war on drugs sort of thing. U.S. intelligence also protected the terrorist organization indirectly. Listen to this. By allowing ISIS convoys to move between the cities that were under its control. Other forms of protection, according to Iraqi security experts, include refusing to implement death sentences issued by Iraqi courts against detained ISIS members and establishing safe havens for the organization's members in western and eastern Iraq. But before I go to the next quote, Eddie, you have any thoughts on this so far?
No, it's. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
It's interesting for sure. But someone asked earlier whether ISIS knows that they're puppets of the U.S. or whether they're willingly puppets or whether that's just how they're used. I don't know, but I think at various times there have absolutely been channels of communication between the U.S. and ISIS, probably with the war in Syria. And with the war in Libya, I think that's pretty much undeniable at this point. And what's true of the CIA and ISIS is probably also true of the Mossad and ISIS. But regardless, the U.S. and Israel constantly find their interests aligned with ISIS's interests, which is why they're constantly using them as a proxy, whether ISIS is doing that wittingly or not. And as we'll show after Carlos finishes this article, is that's been going on for a long time, is that the U.S. utilized ISIS and propped them up and promoted them. And if they weren't directly funding ISIS, they were directly funding groups who were doing joint military actions with ISIS in Syria and Libya. So this is nothing new. They've propped up these groups in the region after giving ISIS a real base of support for the first time by toppling the government of Saddam Hussein and throwing Iraq into a state of chaos. So, yeah, it's so for anybody who knows any history of the Middle East or of geopolitics to say that Hamas is ISIS when it's Israel and the U.S. who have allowed ISIS to flourish and have constantly found their interests aligned with ISIS. It's so absurd. It's the turning of reality on its head, as we always say.
Right. And we covered a few weeks ago an interview that was done to an Israeli high-ranking official where they question him. They ask him, how come you have the relationship that you have with, the Houthis or the Hezbollah or Hamas? But then you seem to have a different sort of relationship with ISIS. And the guy said, well, the relationship we have with ISIS is we treat them so humanely because we believe in treating our enemies humanely. And then he gets pressured a little more. They ask him, well, what about the Hezbollah and Hamas? He's like, no. These people have explicitly attacked Israel. ISIS only attacked Israel once, and then they apologized for it. So we treat them better, but we treat these. And it was so laughable. But if anyone's interested, that's from a past stream. We reacted to it. But listen to this. A high-ranking PMU officer, PMU is the Popular Mobilization Units in Iraq, who asked to remain unnamed, tells the Cradle that the U.S. forces are preventing Iraqi forces from approaching Huron Valley. Huron Valley is where all the terrorists are basically at. It's this very hard valley to access, but that's their hideout spots because that's the most efficient place for them to be hiding out. They're preventing Iraqi forces from approaching Huron Valley by attacking any security forces approaching the area. So the U.S. forces are preventing the anti-terrorist, anti-ISIS Iraqi squads from approaching the area where ISIS is. It's it's absurd. Again, remember that the way that they legitimize continuing to be in Iraq and sending more troops is because they're quote unquote fighting ISIS. Here's a quote from the
And that's within the last week. They sent 1,500 new troops to Syria and Iraq and said it was to fight ISIS. As they're working with ISIS.
And the Iraqi government has asked repeatedly, get these fucking troops out, and it just completely violates. The officer ends up saying this happened when American aircrafts targeted units of the PMU that were attacking ISIS in the region, he reveals, citing intelligence reports confirming the presence of dozens of ISIS members and other extremist organizations in the valley where they've received training and equipment from U.S. forces. Where they receive training and equipment from U.S. forces. So one of the irony here is that ISIS appears to regain momentum each and every time Baghdad raises the issue of U.S. military withdrawal from Iraq. It can no longer be seen as a coincidence that the terror group is now reassembling its forces to target Washington and Tel Aviv's most capable regional foes, the axis of resistance, just when the U.S. and Israel are struggling to handle a region-wide multi-front assault from the Axis. The extraordinary synergies between the Americans and the world's foremost terror group can no longer be ignored. Their targets are one and the same, and ISIS is only now entering the fray, just as Washington begins to lose its hold on West Asia. That is incredible.
It is, but I would argue it's been the case for a while. And journalists have been pointing out that there's probably back channels of communication between the CIA, the Mossad, and ISIS for a while. And in Max Blumenthal's excellent book, The Management of Savagery, he talks about that. The management of savagery means the management of terrorist groups and the using of terrorist groups for imperialist ends. So we see here, Israel claims that Hamas equals ISIS, yet it was Israel, not Hamas, who aided ISIS, Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, and other jihadist elements in the Syrian civil war. More evidence that Zionists are the real terrorists in Palestine. So that tweet got a lot of traction. If you guys want to, if you could go boost that or give it a like. But here we see all the evidence of the U.S. either funding ISIS or funding groups who were doing joint military operations with ISIS and referring to them as moderate rebels. And at one point, an Israeli official said that ISIS should be allowed to maintain their caliphate in eastern Syria because their interests are the same as Israel's, and advised against cracking down on ISIS because their interests are so synonymous with Israel's interests. And then when he was pressured on this and said, well, you basically tacitly supported ISIS in a statement, after ISIS hit a Syrian or an Israeli military outpost, he was questioned as to why Israel didn't clap back. And he said, well, ISIS reached out to us and they apologized. So we weren't going to do anything, which is like you're admitting that you have a back channel of communication between Israel and ISIS. And then Greg versus Crabitalism, who made an appearance earlier on the show, shared this, where an ISIS commander who was captured in Libya talked about being an Israeli Mossad agent. So, and Libya, of course, was the intervention where the U.S. was literally taking terrorists from Chad and transporting them into Libya, transporting terrorists into Libya that weren't even from Libya in order to cause chaos and overthrow Gaddafi and turn Libya from one of the most prosperous countries in all of Africa to a country with no central government. In a state of chaos where warlords are fighting each other in the power vacuum and selling people as slaves out in the public. So, we know who the real terrorists in West Asia are. And we know who the real terrorist sympathizers are. It's not Hamas. It's the United States and Israel. It's the CIA and Mossad.
Yeah, and just one more in the very hefty bag of bananas of examples of the imperialists turning reality on its head. This is what us Marxists have been saying forever, is the essence of bourgeois ideology qua false consciousness. It's literally inversing the way that the world actually is in order to reproduce an order. It is a social order that needs people to understand that social order in incorrect and topsy-turvy ways in order to survive. That's why, any values of truth and the philosophy, frankly, because philosophy is philosophia. It's the love of wisdom, the love of the pursuit of truth. Any of that enterprise is fully incompatible with a bourgeois order that systematically needs you to be wrong about your understanding of the world in order to survive and reproduce itself.
For sure. Well, you want to talk about Iran next, or should we get into Jelly Roll?
Let's do the Iran and then let's go to Jelly Roll. The Jelly Roll's a longer segment, I think.
Yeah, this one's quick. I got 1 million views on this TikTok video, and of course I don't do my TikToks for money. But I was excited because this got 1 million views. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get a lot of money for this, and then I realized TikTok had demonetized it. I'm like, no. So I appealed it, and they put it back up, gave me $200 for the video, said, sorry, we didn't mean to demonetize this. And then 25 minutes later, demonetized it again and took the $200 away. You know how heartbreaking that is for a poor working class political commentator to have $200 take it away? So screw you for that, TikTok. Screw you, NATO operatives who run TikTok. Everyone make sure to either give us super chats or subscribe to our Patreon. So I don't, have to stay up crying every night about the $200 I lost from this video. But that's the tragedy of being a people's funded institute.
Eddie's the Charlie Brown of TikTok.
They took the ball away. Oh, man. I thought I was gonna kick it, and they took it right away. Oh well.
Oh my God.
Watch this video. It's one of my better videos I've done in a while, if I do say so myself.
Iran is one of the most heavily demonized countries in the Western media, but rarely do they tell you about Iran's history and how they got to their current situation. Actually, they never tell you about it, so I'm going to now. In 1979, Iran had an Islamic revolution, which was led by students and the religious clergy. This brought to power an anti-Western government with theocratic elements and a mixed economy. Today, about 70% of Iran's banks and industry are in the hands of the state, which means they're not accessible to Western multinational corporations, which is the main reason why the American ruling class hates Iran so much and why they've been trying to start a war with them for the last 2 decades at least. And you can definitely criticize the Islamic Revolution, its hyper-religious elements, and the Ayatollah. But you should know that in the 1950s, Iranians elected a secular nationalist politician named Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh was not hyper-religious, and he mostly gained popularity because of his plan to invest Iranian oil in Iranian development. For years, Iran's oil resources had been pillaged by British multinational corporations, and Mossadegh originally just asked them to open their books so they could see where all of the Iranian oil money was going. But Britain refused. So next, he asked the British to...
And by the way, I learned recently by watching the fantastic film Coup 53, that Britain was supposedly giving Iran 16% of the oil revenue, but there were all these tricks that they were doing in order to not pay Iran. So people were assuming for years that Britain wasn't paying their fair share, that they weren't actually giving Iran 16%. I can't remember the calculation tricks that they were using to pay Iran less money, but they were comical. The things that they were doing in order to not pay Iran their fair share. So Mossadegh said, open the books. Let us see how you've been ripping us off for years. And Britain said no. And then he moved towards nationalization. Well, then he said, let's split it 50-50. They said no to that. Then he moved towards nationalization.
To split Iran's oil wealth with Iran, 50-50, and the British refused. So at that point, he nationalized the oil. He said that these companies no longer belong to Britain, they belong to Iran. And that is when the US and Britain put Iran under an economic embargo before the MI6 and CIA orchestrated a coup to overthrow Mossadegh. He was replaced by a dictatorial monarchy, which was led by the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, who was eventually the leader that was overthrown in the Iranian Revolution.
Also, the person who actually carried out the coup was this member of the Iranian military. Zaredi was his last name, who was loyal to the Shah. And he was also a big time Nazi sympathizer, big time, extreme right wing, violent guy, like basically had a personality disorder, was a violent, sort of erratic kind of guy, which is always the kind of people who the U.S. pegged to lead these kind of coups on the ground. It's always the most radical elements. Like in Chile, they couldn't back the liberals anymore and get the liberals to beat Salvador Allende, the socialist. So then they're like, okay, we'll go with this General Pinochet guy, the most extremist, violent, murderous, higher up in the military. And that's basically who this Zaredi guy was in Iran. And in this excellent film, Coup 53, that I recommend everybody check out. It's like $3-4 to watch right now. There's all sorts of groundbreaking evidence in that movie. They interview Zaredi's son. They interview the son of this guy who carried out the coup, who was involved in the coup. And he's one of the biggest assholes I've ever seen on camera in my life. He just, like, from a personality, he's just like a terrible person to talk to. He seems extremely arrogant and rude. So you can see the kind of people who the U.S. was backing in Iran. It was the most violent, arrogant, narcissistic, and fascistic elements of the Iranian military.
Revolution. So even if you think Iran is an evil theocracy, they never would have been this way if it wasn't for US and UK imperialism. Iran had a secular leader, but the CIA tossed him out of power because they wanted to keep stealing Iran's oil. So do you see how US meddling in other countries only makes their situations worse? And how the US isn't actually protecting human rights, freedom, and democracy? They're protecting oil interests. It's the same now as it was in 1950.
And Coup 53 points out, too, for years it had been thought that the CIA led up that coup, because that was the story given by Kermit Roosevelt, who was sort of leading up the CIA, a grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, who was a CIA operative and leader. And he wrote in his book that it was mostly the CIA, and he kind of took credit for the coup. What we learned later on, thanks to an uncovered interview with Norman Derbyshire, a spy for the MI6 who was leading the British MI6's activities in Iran, was that the U.S. actually wanted to give up. The coup failed at one point. Mossadegh remained in power, and the CIA said, let's cut our losses and get out of here. But the MI6 was more persistent because it was British oil interests that were being cut into by Mossadegh, so they were more persistent in this coup, and actually Kermit Roosevelt kind of exaggerated his role in the coup, almost to like brag and make it look like it was his operation, when really it was this Norman Derbyshire guy and the British MI6 who were the ones who were pushing hardest for it and played the biggest role. And he also admitted that they killed the Iranian chief of police, who was loyal to Mossadegh, killed him, tortured him, and then dumped his body in the street as a warning. So incredible. And then the what's so crazy about that is the coup government that the U.S. put in power was the government that was overthrown in the Iranian Revolution, which is one of the most demonized political events in the West. And Iran is such a demonized country. We call them a fascist theocracy, even though that's a horrible definition of what they are. They're an anti-imperialist, non-capitalist country, Islamic country. But that revolution would have never happened if it wasn't for the CIA and MI6 coup for oil, right? They had a secular leader. They had a secular leader who wasn't a communist or a socialist, who was left over from the feudal landlord class in Iran. And the CIA and MI6 smeared him as a socialist and then put a Shah in power, a monarchy in power. So yeah, the people, the religious clergy, the students, and the Iranian people rose up and threw your coup government out of power. Go cry about it more.
No, that's wonderfully said. Very elaborate. And it's another instance of something that I think is repeated, and the variables have changed, but it's repeated in most countries around the world. The toolbox of imperialism doesn't change very much. So once you have that,
and that was the first post-World War II coup, even pre-Guatemala, which then served as a blueprint. And they're like, oh, we figured out how to do this. You find your man on the ground, your violent fascistic guy who can carry out the coup for you. You weaken them with sanctions. You pump out propaganda demonizing Mossadegh, and you turn the people against him. You create chaos so you can arrest the leader.
Well, Yeah, well, because Guatemala is 54. There was a coup that they did also to a somewhat progressive Cuban president. I'm not remembering the name, but it was in the 1930s. Um, but yeah, they become experts in the craft. I think starting in 53. There was also one in Costa Rica that was for that, but that one was a little weird because the Soviets were also funding through the Communist Party of Costa Rica the coup leaders at the same time as the CIA was funding. It was a big fucking mess. I mean, to this day, it's like a soft attempting to be a Scandinavian social democratic country.
It is, yeah. I was reading that in Kovalik's book, and I was like, oh, I got to learn more about Costa Rica. It's the Caribbean country I know least about, even though that's where my dad studied Spanish when he was getting his degree. So, pura vida. Thank you so much, Kevin Christensen, for the $10 super sticker. Thank you so much for that. We are a people's funded institute. All of our funding comes from you. That's how we pump out all of our published works. That's how we come to you via StreamYard. Yeah, you can check out all of our books, the Midwestern Marks Publishing Press at midwesternmarks.com. Got a ton of great stuff on there. I've been doing a lot of analysis of healthcare lately and promoting my book or my journal entry in the Journal of American Socialist Studies too, because recently Nicolas Maduro called out the Western vaccines and said, thank goodness we got our vaccines from Russia, China, and Cuba rather than the Western vaccines. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, what the pharmaceutical industry did during the opioid crisis is the same playbook that they followed during COVID. Because when doctors were skeptical of opioids, when they raised concerns about the risks of addiction and overdose, they were smeared as opioid-phobic and they had their employment threatened, right? They said, oh, you're not being sensitive enough towards these patients. You don't care enough about the health of these patients. You need to be silenced or fired from your job. Same thing during COVID, right? People raise legitimate skepticisms. Have these vaccines been tested? What are the side effects? Is it better for a young, healthy person to just avoid the vaccine and, try and stay healthy? What is the effectiveness of masks? What are the side effects of social isolation and keeping kids out of school and not letting kids see humans' faces because their faces are covered up with masks? Like, anyone who brought up these questions was called anti-vax, pandemic denier, and told to shut up and had their employment threatened or their bank account shut down if you lived in Canada. And the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, it's the same thing they did for the opioid crisis. But when they did it for big pharma, the left was on board with it. Like, woohoo, shut those darn critics of big pharma up.
Yeah. The paradoxes of supposed communists who end up trusting the establishment in issues so central, such as these. Yeah. Do we want to go to the next segment? By the way, we mentioned what the donations allow us to do. Among them are our book publications. This is a recent book we put out from Dr. Thomas Riggins. It's got a beautiful cover, and it's a commentary on Lenin's proletarian revolution and the renegade Kautsky. So after the Bolsheviks secede, Kautsky writes a book drowned in the purity fetish, talking about how it's not real socialism and what pure democratic socialism would actually look like. And Lenin tears it to absolute shreds. In this book, you get Lenin's text, and then you get Dr. Riggins's analysis of Lenin's text and contextualization for our day, so that you could see, well, Lenin's criticizing the renegades, those who call themselves Marxists but always side with imperialism. Who are those renegades in our day? How are they functioning within so-called communist organizations? So make sure to check that out. Institute prices, I think it's like $15 for the paperback, like $5-6 for the ebook. So if you want to financially support the Institute and also educate yourself, make sure to check that out. Again, midwesternmarks.com/books.
If you want to get Carlos' book, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism, and other releases as well. I guess I was talking about the healthcare industry. Should we go to the jelly roll, talking about fentanyl?
Yeah, good transition. I was just gonna say the Patreon is probably the best way to support us. It's the one that where your money is not, none of it is taken out by the mediating force. Patreon doesn't take away any money, any fees, or anything like that. So
Enter something, but yeah, it's tiny.
yeah, it's the tiniest in comparison to YouTube and everything else. So if you want to be a consistent supporter, check out our Patreon, and you get a bunch of gifts. So access to our
Tons
Discord.
of perks.
Yeah,
including Carlos's new book, which Victor the Van says is amazing. Yeah, I point that out because it's like it's such a good value. Like that book is so good. To get it for $10 is awesome. So yeah. Looks like we just got a boost of viewers. Welcome everybody. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the stream. So this is Jelly Roll, the famous country singer. I'm a big fan. People know on this channel that I like country music. We were attacked for liking a country song that came out this year because it mentioned fudge rounds. But I'm a huge Jelly Roll fan. I think he has a great voice. I think he has a good message. So I'm excited to see this. I have not seen this video yet. So
I've yet to try some fudge rounds. I got to try them one of these days, by the way.
They're fire.
Doing this morning. Good morning. I'm a little nervous. I'm used to having a rock and roll band behind me when I have a microphone in front of me.
Such a badass way to start.
Uh-huh.
That is so cool. Oh,
He's
man.
so charismatic.
And his music's pretty good. It's better than the Luke Bryan sort of manufactured, commercialized country.
The solution to the opioid crisis, by the way, is to blame China on the entire thing and not capitalism. That's hilarious. Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, like what China should do. They should try and stop the export of raw materials that are then turned into opioids in Mexico and brought to the U.S. Or in other places, because that's where people are getting the raw materials. It's not like China is shipping out opioids, but they're getting raw materials from China. So if there was a joint effort by China to shut down the flow of raw materials that are used to create fentanyl, I think that could show goodwill towards the U.S. and get the media off their backs, because they're giving the Sackler family, diplomatic immunity. The courts are. The people who created the opioid crisis, who we know created the opioid crisis, read the Journal of American Socialist Studies too, if you don't know how they created the opioid crisis yet. We're giving those people diplomatic immunity while the media is blaming China for our drug problems. But still, from a Chinese perspective, I think it would be smart to try and do something about that. But
Bill today about fentanyl, something the country music star knows well.
I was a part of the problem. I am here now standing as a man that wants to be a part of the solution.
Now, he's sharing his lived experience as a former drug dealer.
I brought my community down. I hurt people. I was the uneducated man in the kitchen playing chemist with drugs I knew absolutely nothing about, just like these drug dealers are doing right now when they're mixing every drug on the market with fentanyl, and they're killing the people we love.
He's urging Congress to pass legislation that would stop the flow of fentanyl in the U.S., imposing sanctions on Chinese suppliers and Mexican drug cartels who are bringing it into the country.
I truly believe in my heart that this bill will stop the supply and can help stop the supply of fentanyl.
The artist rose to fame singing hits like Son of a Sinner.
These back roads got me. These pills pretend to be my friend.
His own past of addiction and time in prison. That vulnerability.
You're awesome. Thank you so much.
Striking a deep chord with fans.
trying to find the speech here. Do they have the speech in this video?
I think I might have sent the wrong, chosen the wrong one, because it's a 6-minute speech and that fooled me. I had the thumbnail for the speech. Apologies for that, folks.
Yeah, I'll try and find. Here we go. Oh, that's 2 hours.
No, it's a 5-minute clip.
I've attended more funerals than I care to share with y'all. This committee, I could sit here and cry for days about the caskets I've carried of people I love dearly, deeply, in my soul, good people, not just drug addicts. Uncles, friends, cousins, normal people. Some people that just got in a car wreck and started taking a pain pill to manage it. One thing led to the other. How fast it spirals out of control, I don't think people truly understand.
Jelly Roll is speaking out on a cause that's close to his heart. The rising country star addressed Congress in a powerful Capitol Hill testimony on January 11th, sharing why he's so passionate about urging for government action on the continued fentanyl crisis. The singer attended the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee hearing on the Fend Off.
Yeah, that was a powerful statement here. I hope they go back to it.
I'm used to having a rock and roll band behind me when I have a microphone in front of me. During the time that I've been given to share my testimony here, I think it's important to note before I start that in these 5 minutes I'll be speaking that somebody in the United States will die. of a drug overdose, and it is almost a 72% chance that during those 5 minutes, it will be fentanyl related. Having started that way, Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and esteemed committee members, thank you for having me. I know this is a bit of a curveball, but I like a little baseball myself. My name is Jason D4, but to most I am known as Jelly Roll. It is important to establish earlier that I am a musician and that I have no political alliance. I am neither Democrat nor Republican. In fact, because of my past, my right to vote has been restricted. Thus far, I have never paid attention to a political race in my life. Ironically, I think that makes me the perfect person to speak about this because fentanyl transcends partisanship and ideology, gentlemen and women. This is a totally different problem. And I was speaking outside to the media, and I gave them a statistic that said 190 people a day overdose and die every single day in the United States of America. That is about a 737 plane. That's what about a 737 aircraft can carry. Could you imagine the national media attention it would get if they were reporting that a plane was crashing every single day and killing 190 people? But because it's 190 drug addicts, we don't feel that way. Because America has been known to bully and shame drug addicts.
And these drug addicts, like one of the people I know who got hooked on opioids is the most upstanding member of a community that you could possibly imagine. Someone who sings in their church every Sunday, you know, whose entire family are upstanding members of the community, but they got an ankle injury, got handed opioids by the doctor when they were being prescribed at giant doses in the 2000s. And they got hooked, right? That's how it happens. And if you watch, there's a really good YouTube channel called Invisible People where they go interview homeless people. And there are so many stories of I had a wife, I had kids, I had a job, you know, I had a house, I had all these things going for me. And then I got hurt at work. Then they gave me opioids. Then I ran out of money for opioids, but I was hooked. So I turned to street drugs, right? So we look at, you know, like, oh, it's just druggies. It's just drug heads. No, you know, it's not just people who made bad choices in their life and, you know, threw away all their opportunities. It's people from all over the place and all parts of society who have been victimized by the opioid crisis. And there's this attitude of blaming the victims when it comes to something like that and failing to see the systemic reasons for the crisis, of which there are so many. And again, I cite the Journal of American Social Studies too in the article I did on this. It breaks all of this stuff down in depth.
Right, and that's where you should go if you really want to understand this phenomenon, because they blame either the drug addicts or now to politicize it in the new Cold War against China, they blame China. And it's completely absurd when you know the history. And that term you used, opiophobic, you didn't just pull that out of your left butt cheek. That is a systematic term that the conglomerate of the medical NGOs, the pharmaceutical companies, the universities, the doctors' offices, the government, all these people came together to really push what ended up becoming the opioid crisis by pushing these drugs on people under the excuse that supposedly they weren't addictive. They knew they were addictive. They still pushed it. They made a killing from a situation that actually produced what we have now, where there's like around 70,000 Americans that die a year from overdoses, most of them tied to opioids that are medically prescribed. And then, you know, like you said, upstanding people, medically prescribed drugs. At some point, they can't afford them and they're forced to turn to the street alternative and they end up dying. So it's a real tragic situation, but it's one that's completely avoidable if you don't have a system that treats medicine and taking care of people as a secondary, latent, almost like unimportant factor in what's actually the bottom line, what's actually the purpose of the medical pharmaceutical industrial complex, which is to make fucking money, to accumulate capital, to make as much as possible. It's completely antithetical to the essence of medicine and to the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath, the essence of the roots, the foundations of Western medicine, tells us that the goal of medicine is not only to treat illnesses, but also to prevent it. That's an aspect of medicine that's always rejected here, that's always emphasized in Cuba. That's why they have one of the best, if not the best, healthcare system in the world. It doesn't make any sense.
It's emphasized. If you take a healthcare administration class, there's just no way to do it with the current system. They'll tell you, you know, you're supposed to follow the Hippocratic Oath and put public health before profits, but the system doesn't allow you to do that because every healthcare institution is a market-based private entity.
It's antithetical. It's the what medicine is supposed to be is completely antithetical to how it functions and the medical institutions function in our country because of the system that we have.
Yep. And yeah, and then in healthcare administration, they'll, say, like, look, people are being given surgeries. Women are being given C-sections when they don't need them, even though it's more dangerous because it makes more money for the hospitals. How do we stop this? And of course, the only answer is to nationalize the companies, to move towards socialism. But they put you in these impossible quandaries. They in healthcare administration in the U.S., if you study it at the graduate level, they'll have you analyze the problems. They see the problems, but then they'll just ask you, write an essay on how we fix this. And of course, the only real answer is socialism. But someone says Adam Conover. Sorry.
Just real quick, you mentioned the pregnancy thing and the C-section. I had a friend, I have a friend whose wife, the doctor basically told her that there's no way that he would let her give birth naturally, that they had to do a C-section, and she never understood it until the bill came in afterwards, and she saw how much he was able to charge because it was a C-section.
Gotcha. Yeah, and a lot of those doctors too are making direct money from it. A lot of the physicians own their own practices, so they become their class position changes. Then they go from workers to being petty bourgeoisie. So it creates a financial incentive for the doctors themselves who are prescribing the drugs and the surgeries. It's like, they're gonna make more money from it themselves if they give you a crappy drug. And there are horror stories about this too of doctors who don't know what they're doing, prescribing, experimental treatments that kill tons of people. But this comment said Adam Conover brought up a video about, or released a video about fentanyl recently, and said the negative effects of the crackdown on opiates is it contributes to a more concentrated version. Yeah. Rather than expanding rehab, and in fact, the Sackler family and those who sell opioids are profiting off of the rehab industry. But rather than expanding rehabilitation and moving towards decriminalization and doing common sense things, they've just cracked down on the prescription of opioids. So like the doses people were being prescribed in the early 2000s were huge, astronomical. And, if you talk to people who are now addicted to opioids, they'll tell you this. They'll tell you in the 2000s or early 2010s, I was prescribed some humongous dose. And then I went to another doctor and he's like, what the heck? Why are you taking so much? But by that time I was hooked, right? So what they've done is decrease the doses and made it harder for people to get opioids, but the people are already hooked. They're already addicted. So what do if they can't get opioids? They go to street drugs. They go to heroin, right? Rather than being weaned off of opioids in like a rehabilitation facility where it can be overseen by professionals. They just are like, oh, we got to cut back on opioids. Let the people that we already got addicted fend for themselves, and then they end up doing fentanyl.
Instead of dealing and trying to understand what the actual root of the problem is with that. But the sad news is that narrative is changing too, because the statistics say that in all likelihood, almost every person in this room has lost a friend, family member, or colleague to the disease known as addiction. I've attended more funerals than I care to share with y'all. This committee, I could sit here and cry for days about the caskets I've carried of people I loved dearly, deeply, in my soul, good people, not just drug addicts. Uncles, friends, cousins, normal people. Some people that just got in a car wreck and started taking a pain pill to manage it. One thing led to the other. How fast it spirals out of control, I don't think people truly understand. So many people. Equally, I think it's important for me to tell y'all that I'm not here to defend the use of illegal drugs. And I also understand the paradox of my history as a drug dealer standing in front of this committee. But equally, I think that's what makes me perfect to talk about this. I was a part of the problem. I am here now standing as a man that wants to be a part of the solution. I brought my community down. I hurt people. I was the uneducated man in the kitchen playing chemist with drugs I knew absolutely nothing about, just like these drug dealers are doing right now when they're mixing every drug on the market with fentanyl, and they're killing the people we love. I'll be honest with y'all, my desire is to only get older and only do better and be better. I believed when I sold drugs genuinely that selling drugs was a victimless crime. I truly believe that, y'all. My father always told me what doesn't get you in the wash will get you in the rinse. Now I have a 15-year-old daughter whose mother is a drug addict. Every day I get to look in the eyes of a victim in my household of the effects of drugs, every single day. And every single day I have to wonder, me and my wife, if today will be the day that I have to tell my daughter that her mother became a part of the national statistic. History repeats itself, gentlemen. Even in the 1990s, crack cocaine had long made its way into my middle lower class neighborhood. And at that moment, even as a teenager, you could have never convinced me in that moment that there would be a far bigger problem on the horizon in the form of a pharmaceutical drug. And then I watched opioids and Oxycontin burst onto the scene.
By the way,
I'm here to tell
crack cocaine was filtered into poor neighborhoods by the CIA in order to fund the Contras in Nicaragua, a fascistic group who was mass murdering people in the Contra War, killed about 50,000 people plus, fighting the socialist Sandinistas in Nicaragua, who were making great gains for the people, expanding healthcare access, decreasing poverty. So the U.S. backed a bunch of fascists, armed them up, and funded them by transporting drugs into poor, majority black neighborhoods in the U.S.
Yeah, and that completely undermined the base of the Black freedom struggle, which was at the forefront of the class struggle in the U.S. You kill all their leaders, and then you drug up the communities. You keep them systematically poor. That's a way to destroy the enemy, if I've seen one.
Absolutely. And there's a great book about that called Dark Alliance by Gary Webb, who coincidentally turned up dead after he wrote this analysis, blowing the lid off of the CIA's funding of the Contras using the sale of crack cocaine.
Tell y'all that fentanyl is going to make the Sackler family look like saints. And I want to let y'all sit with that for a second. It is time for us to be proactive and not reactive. We were reactive with crack, we were reactive with opioids, and y'all are taking the first step at somebody in Senate finally being proactive. I truly believe in my heart that this bill will stop the supply and can help stop the supply of fentanyl. But in part of being proactive, gentlemen and women and ladies, I have to be frank and tell y'all that if we don't talk to the other side of Capitol Hill and stop the demand, we're going to spin our tires in the mud. Y'all are taking the first step, but I encourage you to take it outside of this room. You take it to your colleagues and your constituents, and you give them the most that you can. I know I've got a few seconds here. Senator Brown said I may or may not go over. All I want to say is that I not only encourage y'all to do this, I encourage y'all to take it a step further. At every concert I perform, I witness the heartbreaking impact of fentanyl. I see fans grappling with this tragedy in the form of music that they seek solace in music and hope that their experiences won't befall others. They crave reassurance. These are the people I'm here to speak for, y'all. These people crave reassurance that their elected officials actually care more about human life than they do about ideology and partisanship. I stand here as a regular member of society. I am a stupid songwriter, y'all, but I have firsthand witnessed this in a way most people have not. I encourage y'all to not only pass this bill, but I encourage you to bring it up where it matters, at the kitchen table. Thank you for your time.
And I don't know what bill he's promoting in specific there, but the way he spoke about the crisis of fentanyl and drug addiction in this country was really hit home.
Yeah, it's from what I've been able to read, part of the bill also targets China because that's where the raw materials are obtained. But it's still a crisis that affects our communities. It's virtually impossible, if not highly improbable, that you'll meet an American that doesn't know someone that has been affected by this. So it's important for us to have the analysis that Eddie provides in the Journal of American Socialist Studies too, which literally just gives you a Marxist analysis of our healthcare system, a historical materialist analysis, and that helps you make sense of why it is that these completely irrational things exist and who benefits from them.
Absolutely. Right. It's the contradiction between exchange value and use value at the end of the day, which Marx talks about in chapters 1 through 3 of Capital Volume 1. It's contradictory. You can't produce in a way and provide healthcare in a way that's beneficial for the whole of society, that's providing the maximum use value to the whole of society if you're profit driven. If you're trying to maximize shareholder profits, that is in contradiction with doing what's best for society.
Right. And Marxist Saul says here, when I was at the UAW strike, one worker lost his son 3 months prior. He just got back from a DOJ rally in D.C. blaming immigrants in China for fentanyl. He said thousands of parents with kids who OD'd there. That's extremely sad because that's a case of false consciousness. It's blaming the people who are perhaps the least to blame. You end up blaming a country that is trying to defend itself from imperialism and a group of migrant workers that are coming here to be super exploited and that are forced to leave their country because the U.S. empire destroyed it. So, and then the actual people that destroyed the lives of your kids and family members are just running off scot free. So it's an issue that a lot of American peoples are obviously emotional about, as they should be. But unless we have that analysis that Eddie provides, it's going to be very hard for us to counter the very anti-China, anti-immigrant narrative that specifically the right has used to discuss this issue.
Agreed. Journal of American Socialist Studies too. Check it out.
Do we have anything else here?
We have Gonzalo Lira passed away in a Ukrainian prison. Tragically, was tortured and held there by Ukraine for posting YouTube videos critical of the Ukrainian regime. So classic fascist move. Classic use of the state to crack down on a dissident, someone who is exposing the corruption of the Ukrainian fascist kleptocracy from inside Ukraine.
Mm.
You know, there have been a lot of silly critiques or a lot of, silly people talking about Gonzalo's past or whatever, using that to tear him down. But, ultimately, he was a person who was exposing the Ukrainian government for what they are and who got killed for doing that by the state. So it's tragic. It shows the nature of the Ukrainian state, the fascistic and oppressive nature of it, and thoughts with his family, of course.
And this is an American citizen. It's an American citizen that was tortured to death by a state we've sent hundreds of billions of dollars to. And of course, as Marvin implies here, we haven't said anything about it. The least bit of courtesy, you could have at least said something about it. But of course, they didn't say anything. And when I think it was Wyatt Reed or one of the Gray Zone folks brought this up, they in the White House, they didn't they didn't say anything about Gonzalo Lira. So it's nothing new. We've been warning that something like this was bound to happen. And the state just turned a blind eye to its citizen journalists being killed by a fascist state.
Yep. Rest in peace, Gonzalo. I think that's it for today, though. Thank you all for joining us for this fantastic stream. Thanks for doing it with me, Carlos. This was great. I'm absolutely exhausted, and I have practice again in the morning. But it's always great to hop on and talk about politics in a long form and conversational format. Oh my goodness!
Holy crap!
Mauricio, my boy, my homie, $100. That might be the biggest super chat we've ever gotten.
Yeah, I think it is. Holy shit! Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you so much. Mauricio's awesome. Someone who's dedicated communist. Exactly the kind of communist that we love too. Someone who's follows Noah's Walk the Walk article really well. Tries to be an upstanding person in their community, and create a good example of what communists are. So it was great. I met Mauricio in Chicago. It was an awesome conference. Really cool. Meeting him was definitely a highlight. He says, too long overdue. I haven't made a stream, brothers. Much solidarity. The moment is never not ripe to give 110% for the real movement of history. Heck yeah. P.S. My copy of Jazz has Eddie's signature. Let's go. Absolutely got to sign that in Chicago. That's badass. Thank you so much, Mauricio. That is a huge chunk of change. That'll do a lot to help our operations here at the Institute and help us continue to push the class struggle forward, push the real movement of history forward, like you said. So, there's no words to thank you for giving $100. But just know that you have my gratitude from the bottom of my heart, not just for that, but for inspiring us, by being such an awesome comrade and someone who watches our content. It's meeting people like you. It inspires us to keep doing what we do. So,
no, basketball player too, right?
Yeah,
hell yeah. So I hope that's going well. Sports are so important for building discipline, man. That's one of the things that I've come to to see more and more a lot of the more disciplined revolutionaries and organizers and thinkers that I've met. They usually have some form of sport background. So it's really important that you keep that basketball grind. I hope everything's going well on that front. And I hope you can make it as far as you can in the sport. But if you don't, just know that you're going to come out of it equipped with a tool set of discipline, which is perhaps the most important thing, conjoined with a work ethic that you can have to be successful in other facets of life. So thank you so much, brother. Yeah.
Absolutely. You got anything else to share, Carlos?
Yeah. For anyone interested, again, Tom's book, make sure to check it out. Eddie, myself, Noah, and Danny gave endorsements to it. And a little shameless plug here of the Substack. I've been able to write an article literally every single day for the last 17 days. Some of them are older articles, but quite a few of them are newer articles. All of them are either philosophy or politics. So if you would like to support my work, you can subscribe for free. It boosts the subscriber count, which boosts the Philosophy in Crisis Substack on Substack in general. I think I have 800 and something free subscribers now. So if you have various email accounts, fucking help by subscribing to as many email accounts as you can. And if you have the financial means and would like to, financially help me out with the work that I'm doing here, you can subscribe, I think, for $5 a month, the price of a cappuccino, to support some of the philosophy articles that I'm writing here and the politics ones. The ones that are, really important for contemporary politics, I'm not putting those behind paywalls. I'm putting those up for free. But anyways, if you want to help fund my work as a struggling professor whose rent is 95% of his paycheck, make sure to check that out as well. So.
Absolutely. It's well worth it. A lot of great articles. I've been loving them. So.
Oh yeah. So, well, thank you to everyone who watched. Thank you to everyone who was able to donate. It's extremely appreciated. And we'll be here hopefully tomorrow. We have a few subjects planned to talk about with Noah. He wasn't able to make it today for his sleeping patterns.
That lazy bastard.
Yeah, he wakes up at 4, so he's by 8 o'clock he's out. But hopefully we can get one in early tomorrow with the three of us and cover another set of topics that we have prepared, which I think are very interesting and important. So thank you all who watched, and we'll see you soon, hopefully tomorrow. Peace.
And economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.